so many wonderful things we can say about Rachel. Actually, this is a very moving moment for me. I don't know Rachel that much, but I feel very connected to her. And I have a great love and admiration for you. In 2008, she came here and presented a living room dialogue for us. I think the theme of it was prostitution. Is it a choice? And that question is very, very relevant to us today to be thinking about. I have been praying for you since that time. For you and for your gyms, those girls you love. I admire your courage and your crossing of many boundaries and your analysis, your smarts, and your courage to speak out to those who can make change. So in the name of the Network for Peace Through Dialogue and of all of us here, I want to present this plaque to you. The plaque says, "The Network for Peace Through Dialogue honors Rachel Lloyd, woman of compassion and commitment, healing and empowering girls, educating the community, advocating for structural change. Recognition Night, November 4th, 2015. Rachel is going to say a few words to us.
Please, made me cry. Thank you, Sister Peg, for the lovely words. I'm like, there are people who give an intro and they have it written out and they don't put as much heart and feeling as somebody's been reading the book. Sister Kathleen and Sister Virginia, thank you so much for your support. And you and I are Facebook friends, and so I know there are times when you're praying for me, and I'm sure that there are lots of times when I don't know that, and that really means a lot. And thank you for this. I'm looking at, this is going to sound so strange. So other than the date, which is tonight, if I could get this on my headstone, this is kind of woman of compassion and commitment, healing and empowering girls, educating the community, advocating for structural change. That is kind of what I've wanted my whole life to be about, and spend kind of every waking and some of my sleeping moments working on. So if anybody's figuring out how to do my obit one day, that right there, that'll work. I feel like, okay, so moving on from that, I feel like I have a special affinity for the sisterhood and for nuns. When I think when you've done a lot of, I do a lot of public speaking, and some of these stories have become like urban legend now. So I think there's lots of things that people know about me, but probably one thing that most people don't know is that I really, really wanted to be a nun when I was little. Like really, really wanted to be a nun. I think it was inspired. I want to say it was a nun story, maybe, Ingrid Bergman, Audrey Hepburn, one of those. And I'm thinking, it was very tragic, right? And I really liked the whole tragic part. And so I decided that I was going to be a nun who was in a silent order. And so I took a vow of silence, and I must have been about 6 or 7. And so that didn't last very long, as you can well imagine. And so I think God definitely recognized that silence probably wasn't, silence and a vow of poverty and a vow of chastity probably wasn't the way I was going to go with my life. But fortunately he had plans that would allow me to do some of the advocacy work and the supporting the community work as well. So I do have a special little thing in my heart for nuns. So I just want to say, just briefly, I have to say that just seeing the young women, how awesome were they? They were so good.
like really, I wanted to cry. I'm having one of those nights. But I felt like, right, my hair was standing up on end, and I was like, this is so beautiful. And I was looking at them, and I was thinking, you know, they were in their little schoolgirl uniforms. And I was thinking, right, that was a uniform that I used to wear. I was in a private school when I was like 12, 13, and we had to do very similar, kind of the grey and the blue. And right, you try to funk it up with some like different niche socks. Right, there's originality in the shoes or how you do your hair, but you're kind of, and I was thinking about, you know, just the promise and potential of the young women who stood before us tonight. How, I mean, just right, they're beautiful and glowing and young and talented and fresh. And I thought about the young women that I serve and how rarely people see the young women that I serve in that way. Right, the young women that I serve, you know, and the comments range from anywhere from, she's really hardened. How old is she? 13, but she's really hardened, or she's made these choices, or she likes it, or she wants it. And so those ideas about, right, when we were fighting for the Safe Harbor Act in New York in 2008, became the first state to prevent the prosecution of children who couldn't even legally consent to sex because they were too young to consent to sex under New York state law, but were being prosecuted. From up in Albany, one of the memos that floated around was, these young people are on a life path that will lead to incarceration anyway. Right, and so those ideas about who our young people are based on race, based on class, based on the zip code that they were born in, based on their growing up in the child welfare system, based on the trauma that they've already experienced, this idea that as a victim you are forever marked and marginalized, and right, there's no hope left for you, and even in the last couple of years, as we've begun to see, it's really taken the last 2 years where we've begun to kind of integrate the idea of trafficking into what's happening to American kids, to American girls and women. And that's taken a really long time, and I want to commend Network for Peace for in 2008, several years before anybody else was really talking about that, for beginning that dialogue. But right, as we're beginning to kind of have that recognition in the last really 2 years to 18 months, right, and MSNBC is doing Sex Slaves in America specials, and there's all this kind of stuff happening. There's still this idea that if we rescue victims and we put them in a corner somewhere, and then we just, right, forever they're going to be victims. And that idea is just as damaging and just as harmful as all the other stigmas and all the other ideas. And so, right, there are times when people say, you know, this work must be really hard. And there are days, right, I've had some days recently that have been, right, really painful. We just lost one of our young women. There are times that are really hard, and there are things that we see that are, right, make you question humanity, make you go home. And there are nights when I have a group, I run a weekly group with my young women, and they're in every Wednesday, and there are nights where I go home from group, and I'll often call Julie, our chief program officer, on the way home and say, I don't get how we live in a world where I've got 15 girls in my group and they have all been sexually abused, they've all been violated, they're all struggling with their relationships with their mothers who are like all of this pain and all of this violence. And there are times when, right, that can be incredibly overwhelming, and right, your heart is just heavy. And there are times, right, as a woman of faith, where I don't understand God, and I don't understand why some things happen in this world, and I don't understand, right, why girls go through, why any child goes through any of the stuff that they go through. But yet, that's not my daily experience. What you saw from those young women tonight is what I get to see with my young women every day, right? Their beauty, their joy, their fun, right? I was watching the two young women on the front, and they were like holding hands, one of my glasses, and they were like giggling, and they were like, and I was like, oh, they're really nervous, but right, they were awesome, but they were like holding hands, like whispering, right, and just seeing them be, right, teenagers, right, I get to see their creativity, their passion, their potential. I get to see all of that every day, and sometimes that gets lost when we're talking about an issue so heinous, an issue so horrific, an issue that is so filled with violence and trauma and right, poverty and all the things in our world that are so painful and so difficult to comprehend. And sometimes, right, we can think about these issues and they feel so overwhelming that then we kind of get stuck in inertia and we think we can't do anything. Right, if you had two nuns all of a sudden deciding we're going to start dialogues for peace, but you're doing it and you've done it and you continue to do it. Two nuns working with social media? Pretty impressive. Right, it's about us as individuals being able to say, what's my place in this work? What's my role in this work? I may not be able to win the Nobel Peace Prize, right? I may not be able to change, end poverty tomorrow, right? If I was Miss America, I'm sure I'd get up and claim that that's what I wanted to do. But right, I know that I can't do that. And as much as I want to work towards, and so there's always that part of my head where I'm like working towards a different world, but if I take it on in that scope, it becomes overwhelming. It becomes, right, I get stuck in inertia and, okay, I just won't do anything, I'll just sit in my house and watch TV. And so it's been about, right, what's the small part that I can play? What's the, right, whether it's in individual lives. But we really encourage you to go volunteer with Big Brother, Big Sister, and mentor a 6, 7, 8-year-old, because the likelihood that that kid will ever walk through the doors of GEMS, if they have a consistent, supportive adult in their life for the next few years, really, really dramatically decreases. And we know this by researching, right, there's been enough research on the impact of one consistent, supportive adult. And that may not feel like I'm ending trafficking, but it's a huge impact, and right, who that child then interacts with and who that child affects. It can be about changing, right, the fighting for child welfare reform in your local community. It can be about encouraging people in your church to become foster parents or adopted parents. Right, it can be about just changing the language with people around you and having conversations. It's about, as you talked about, right, this continuum of violence against women. Not just trafficking as kind of this siloed, terrible issue that has nothing to do with me in a foreign country and people chained to the walls, but it's a continuum of violence and degradation of women that we all see and are involved with on some level. And how do I need to write to my local media about some of the language that they're using or the ways that they are exploiting teenage girls in the ads, or right, there's so many different ways that we can get involved. And so I think, right, what keeps me going and continues to feed me is feeling like if I felt like all the time that I was responsible for like ending trafficking, that's kind of a lot, right? But when I know that all I have to do is get up every day and go love on someone, right? When I know that I have to get up and be in our office and hug someone when they walk through the door. And that may not, right, that's so tiny. That's so tiny and yet so incredibly significant. Many, many years ago when I was coming out of the, I was actually still in the life, I was still under the control of my pimp. I'd taken a very, very bad, the worst kind of beating that I'd had. My face was all fractured up, I was pretty messed up. And I was living in Germany, and I walked into a clinic. I knew that I probably had broken my nose, and right, I hadn't broken my nose had been broken for me, right, and I was all kind of jacked up. And I can remember walking in, and there was this nurse, and in my mind, right, and this going back many years, in my mind her name was Helga, because it was Germany, I'm sure it wasn't really Helga. She had long blonde braids. But she was very, I do remember she was very buxom. She was what we call a buxom lady. And I remember her, you know, she asked me some questions, and you know, I was doing my best in kind of fractured German to, right now I was pretty upset and crying and in pain. And I think I said I fell down the stairs or something, and I think she was like, yeah, right. But I remember her taking me and putting my head on her chest, on her buxom bosom, and just hugging me for a really long time. And I can remember sobbing and sobbing and sobbing and feeling for the first time in a really long time like somebody was paying attention, like somebody cared, like somebody was interested in me. And right, I walked out of there and I went back to my pimp that same day, and I didn't run and say, thank you, that was amazing, I feel rescued now. Right, that's not how it works. But that moment, I mean, that was probably the first non-sexual, non-violent, like, real touch that I'd had in probably quite a long time. Just nurturing and kind, and somebody who loved me without wanting anything back, and without us even being able to communicate that well in the same language. And, you know, I think about her, right? I mean, I was 19 when that happened, so that was 3 years ago. I think about her kindness and the fact that in that moment, she stepped up to the plate. And I think about the fact that she also doesn't ever get to know how the story turned out, right? Like, things turned out pretty good in the end, right? GEMS is now the largest program in the US serving this population. What started on my kitchen table, 3 or 4 girls, was serving almost 400 girls through intensive services each year. We've got a 72% success rate in helping girls exit the commercial sex industry. We're training law enforcement around the right. I mean, I'm really super proud, quite frankly, of the work that we're doing. I don't know her name. I don't get to go back and say thank you, right? And there are many people in our lives where they'll never get to come back and say thank you to us. We'll never know the impact that we've had on someone's life. And if we're looking for that, right, that can't be our role in doing this. So, you know, you want to rescue someone and then be grateful, right? And sometimes in this anti-trafficking work, we get into that whole rescue thing. This isn't about rescue. It's about love, it's about empowerment, it's about support, it's about building on people's inherent resilience. And so I encourage you, right, like that woman, and obviously there were multiple people after that who came into my life for certain moments or seasons or periods and loved on me and supported me and were kind to me. And some of them, right, I was able to go back and thank. Some of them, right, I'll never see them again, and I don't have that ability. So I encourage you to think about, like, whose life are you feeding into like that? Who are you coming into contact with that just in those moments, right? Whether you have a few moments, whether you have an hour, whether you have weeks, whether you have years to be able to impact someone's life, and you may not get to have, like, right, the thing. I'm very fortunate that I get to see my young women graduate and right, get the GEDs, finish high school. I've got 28 young women in college this semester. It's amazing. But right, that's a privilege. That's icing on the cake. That's not why we do this work. We're not called to do this work so we get to see the thank you, so we get to see, right, we're called to do this work because it's the right thing to do. And so while this work is hard and painful, I think of that woman, I think of other people in my life, and I know I can go home at the end of the day knowing that I loved on you, knowing that and if I didn't do everything I need to do, I can apologize, because that's okay too, right? When I'm a human being and I mess up sometimes and I get to apologize, but right, I can trust that I have loved on you and supported you. And right, I've been thinking a lot, about our young woman that just passed away, and I kept thinking, God, what was the last thing I said to her? What was the last thing I said to her? And I can remember she'd come in wearing like these super like shredded jeans, and I remember teasing her about that, and I'm like, God, was that the last thing? And I think, you know what? I'm almost sure that the last thing I said was I love you, because that's always the last thing I say to all of the girls and young women, right, who come in and out of the door. And so I have to trust that that's our part. All we can do is plant the seed and allow, right, somebody else may be coming along and watering it. Maybe we get to see the seed come to fruition, maybe we don't. But that's not what we're called to do. You don't have to be running out doing outreach at 3 o'clock in the morning or running into brothels, rescuing, right? That's not the work. That's not the work. It's about love, it's about community, it's about treating people with the dignity and respect that you would want to be treated with in any interaction. So whether it's walking past a 40-year-old woman who's clearly drug addicted on the street one night and just going to buy her a cup of coffee, and you don't have to preach at her, you don't have to do nothing. Just buy her a cup of coffee and look her in the eye and treat her as a human being. Right, whatever that looks like, I encourage you to think about how you're planting your seeds. Thanks.